Welcome to the Thrive Today podcast. I'm Natalie Bourne, the media host for Thrive Today and the founder of Innovation Meets Leadership. We are a platform for women who lead and believe. And today we are sitting down with one of my favorite guests and friends, Amy Balog. She is a senior executive coach. And not only that, she has coached me for many years. She's a facilitator, a writer, a speaker, and she's dedicated to helping leaders harness the transformative power of peace to drive performance. With over 15 years of coaching experience, Amy partners with global leaders to help them uncover their peace self as a grounding identity in a high pressure, achievement driven world. Oh my goodness, don't we need this conversation today? Hello, Amy. How are you?
Hi. Hi, Natalie. Always, I like we were joking beforehand. It's like we get together on podcast time, so I love seeing
Right.
you every time.
That's right. Well, I'm so excited to catch up with you because this message of peace over performance, it has
Mhm.
evolved for you over time. Maybe let's update people a little bit on what it is, but also talk a little bit about how this project has kind of taken on a life of its own.
Sure, sure. So, yeah, Peace Over Performance birthed itself when I was trying to help my corporate clients that I've had 18 years now with, and these are all very experienced, amazing leaders. But I noticed, hey, people are starting to put their whole identity in their job, and it's not a healthy thing to do. And of course, the world is man, it's intense. I mean, you go to work and you give everything you have and everybody else's, and you just start becoming your performance identity, which we'll talk about.
Mhm.
So I was given some language. I think it was very much a gift from God to talk to people about this in a different way. We were talking about work-life balance and, making sure that you're using mindfulness, but really it came down to a very powerful, simple message that your peace has to be the fuel to your performance. Now, what in the heck does that mean? So I started down this road a couple of years ago and shaped it out to be part of my coaching practice. And then it evolved into me being on podcasts and then evolved into keynote speeches. So essentially, what it is this idea that it's tackling down identity, right? Because if the problem was we have our identity misplaced or undefined, and the peace self, as I define it, just so we had a previous podcast, you and I, on this, I think with Thrive. I want to say, I'm trying to remember. We've been together before on this topic, but
Yeah, no, it was on Thrive, and so people can actually go back on our Thrive platform and listen to you originally kind of talk about the premise of peace over performance, and I would absolutely suggest that if you're listening to
yeah.
this, make sure you go back and listen to that one because this will be kind of an extension of that conversation.
Yes, so that would help but I'll just as a little bit of a review, peace, as I'm talking about it, is peace in identity, not just feeling peace like feeling peaceful. This is peace as identity, and every single human being, God wants you to acknowledge this about yourself, that you have a peace self, which is you are always worthy, always loved, and always learning. That is the peace self. And right there, that is really where we come into the world, we have access to it, but we lose sight of it because what happens in the world, we get something we all know extremely well is the performance self, which is to, responsible. I'm going to be responsible. I'll be responsible, determined and achieving this performance self. It's demanded of us so early in life. And that's where we end up building a huge relationship. And that lends us into things like where our career or our job becomes who we are. Without our job, without our career, who are we? You
Yeah.
know, but the peace self is there. And what I want to talk about today is Christ and Jesus and how he really brings us our peace self and takes care of it and helps us grow from there. That isn't what I've been talking about as much with peace over performance, which became a hashtag on LinkedIn. I was really keeping it mainly to how people need to understand their peace self and their performance self and at least get the language and start coming to terms with new questions to deal with what they're doing with their leadership and their careers. But now, as years have gone by, underneath it always was my faith, always underneath this was really when it really comes down to peace, the Prince of Peace, Jesus says, "Peace not as the world gives, but as I give."
Mm.
And so, me personally, so a couple of years ago, I made this huge decision. I left 30 years of Atlanta, moved back up near my hometown in Northeast Ohio, and it was a massive change. But what's been beautiful about it is it's allowed me to kind of continue to work, but also reset the gearing in my life so I could hear God more.
Yeah.
And as I
So
was
cool.
hearing God more, He was pouring into me in my journaling, in my prayer time. And I write a lot of prayers all about how He really is the one that is driving peace over performance. And so that's what I want to talk about with you today.
Wow. Well, I want to kind of tease out a couple things you said there because, first and foremost, when we think about your journey, I love what you said was like, hey, I was trying to have this business conversation, but ultimately I was trying to really talk to people about Christ. And
Hmm.
ultimately, apart from him, we can't have true peace, right? We can have a false sense of peace. We can, try to go through the motions or even brainwash ourselves, but truly, I don't know how people live this life without a lens of Christ. I don't know how people
Hard.
live this life without a greater hope than any hope we could ever imagine, which is the hope to be with him one day. And so I love that God has taken you on a journey to
Hmm.
say, "Okay, you're comfortable talking about this. Now let's unveil the reason behind your hope," right? Like, what is the reason behind the peace and the hope that you have? And so I really love that. And I think there's something to be said about the fact that a lot of people live in a world where they not only do they get a lot of arrows from the outside thrown at them, but underneath it all, and even in their own head, they don't believe
Hmm.
they're worthy. And so
Right.
from that, if we're operating from that place, the only thing we can do is perform, perform, perform so that
Right.
somebody will think we're worthy. And it's weird because no matter how hard you perform and how much you pour in, somehow it's just never enough.
Right. 0 to 0 all the time.
Yeah.
It's maddening. Well, so let's talk about that because I'm gonna break the worthy, the loved, and the learning down a little bit, right? Because those are 3 big, 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 big abundance areas for God's delivery into us. So, okay, before I get into that though, we should talk about the world and unworthiness and talk a little bit about this reality. So, okay, people are listening that have Christian faith, get this. People who don't have Christian faith, will maybe will give you, give you time to think about this a little bit. But the way a believer, a lover of Jesus, we see is that we're free will beings. We're made in God's image, but we are all fallen to sin, right? I mean, that's we were born into sin, and we're wandering in a fallen world, right? And we come into life in this kind of wild jungle of sin
Mhm.
essentially as little tiny babies into this world and growing up into it. And sin is our inability to live God's perfect way that he designed us to live. We just can't do it. That's why Jesus had to come and fulfill the law that God laid out. And then also because we can't actually love each other at the level of unconditional love upon which God can love us. That is impossible. Jesus even said in Gospels, like, okay, if you even think about another woman, you're cheating on her, right? I mean, because God can read our hearts.
Yeah.
So sin is there, it's a reality. And what happens, as I call them, is when we get into life, we get a little almost snapped back in the world because almost immediately as children, because we begin to encounter what I call unworthiness encounters. Unworthiness encounters. And what is that? So these are moments where we're in the world, and just because we're also made, this is my belief, this is Amy belief, that we're made in the image of God.
Yeah.
When we come into the world, there's a part of us that knows how we should be treated. We should be loved by everybody, and we should be easily able to love everybody else. That's what we think. That's because that's the seed of God in us, right? But then there's sin. So when I was a little girl, I'm going to give you one of my unworthiness encounters and tie it into this. So when I was a little girl, I lived in this middle class neighborhood, and there was a number of other girls on the street that were roughly my age. And the thing that about me as a little kid is I was awkward, okay? It's just I was awkward, alright? I was one of the kids, I did not want to climb a tree. I guess if I climbed a tree, I was guaranteed to hurt myself, which I did. I was the kid that wanted to be kind of alone with a few kid with somebody else, just with the Barbies, or I just wanted to be in the room with a book or drawing something. I wanted to be more in my make-believe world than I actually wanted to be out with other kids. But most of these girls in the neighborhood were all, let's go do the most daring thing we can do and run all over the street and, be like what kids we think of kids running. And I mean, I'm dating myself, but we're talking back, 1970s, right? So I didn't know, and I had no idea. This, unbeknownst to me, is that I was being made fun of for being different,
Yeah.
back then. I was being kind of made fun of, and I had no idea I was the butt of many jokes in their little circle. Or I think that maybe it was not as bad as I think, but here's what happened. So I got invited to a pool party.
Mm.
And I thought it was just, hey, let's all get in the pool and have fun together and be in the pool. It's a hot summer day. And little did I know that it was a game to keep Amy underwater.
Oh my gosh, Amy. Terrifying.
Yeah. So I'm in the pool and one of the girls drags me in and somehow quickly gets me under the water in the deep end. And I'm not that great of a swimmer at this time. I'm little. And she has her feet between my neck and she's holding me in there.
Oh my
and
gosh.
and barely lets me come up for air. As soon as I got air, they pushed me back down. I almost drowned that day. I almost drowned. And I tell you this dramatic story. I mean, by the grace of God, an older sister came out and like stopped the shenanigans, right? And I was so weak when I got out of the pool. I could just like my arms were shaking, my
Oh my
legs were
gosh.
shaking. I went home and get this, I didn't tell my mom.
Oh my
Bec
gosh.
because I was afraid of retribution,
Mm.
and that was the first time in my life I have now you can tell, right? That memory is emblazoned in my mind because it was such a shocker because I didn't see it coming, right? And it was the first time I had the most dramatic unworthiness encounter.
Yeah.
And it's when the world tells you, "Hey, you're not part of us, right? We're not," and that's the kind of stuff that happens to us. And it happens to everybody. Now that's a dramatic example story. And to this day, like if I met these girls that did this, I would totally forgive them, right? Because what that also illustrates is
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
sin, right? I think they'd be aghast to know what I experienced then.
Yeah.
But we have these encounters of unworthiness. We can give them unintentionally to other people. I remember when I was in high school, I was, 14 years old, very mature. Um, I had a friend, one of the circle of friends that I had, and I decided to write her. We weren't getting along. It was all very, very much teenage drama. Imagine that. And I wrote her a Jerry Maguire letter to explain why we should no longer be friends. And okay, so my mom is in heaven now, but when my mom was still here with us and it was still, living in my hometown years and years after that, I'm talking decades after that, my mom ran into her mother in a grocery store and her mother said how sad and hurtful it was for her daughter to go through that at that time.
Wow.
And I remember hearing that thinking, oh my gosh,
Mm.
that really scarred her for me. And I thought, I want to redo.
Yeah.
You know? So
Mhm.
these encounters of worthiness pile up on us,
Yeah.
and therefore what happens is born is the performance self.
Mhm.
And that performance self has got one of two things going on. It's going to wear an armor
Yeah.
and show the world that I can't be hurt. I'm strong. I can't be hurt. You can't get to me. It'll go that direction and kind of try to
Yeah.
overcome people by force of personality, force of will, force of anything else, and be, or it'll put a shell. It'll climb into a shell, which was more my nature, is like, okay, I'm going to hide and retreat from the world and be, much more socially selective and, not trust people. And you learn these lessons, this vigilance that you learn, and the performance self there is born.
Yeah. Wow, it's so powerful, the story that you shared. I have my own story like that that I share from stage. I don't know if I've ever told it to you.
Hmm.
But in a nutshell, I went to a spend the night party, and these girls made a tape about me and my family. There was racial slurs, there was all this
Oh.
kinds of stuff in there,
Mm,
and my decision at 8 years old was I'm not gonna let them see that they got to me. So I packed my bag, I made up a lie that I left my medicine at home, and I didn't cry until I hit the door, until I was outside the door, like, walking home, and I walked home
mhm,
that night. It was, like, one of my first times I ever got to spend the night anywhere, and here we go, right? But for me, what came out of that time is, "I'll show you. I'll prove to you that I'm worthy," and so you look back 20 years later, you're working your butt off, and you're thinking, "Who am I doing this for?" Those
mhm,
people are not around. Those
right,
people have moved on with their life, but something in my little eight-year-old self said, "You have to prove to everyone else that you're worthy." And so you talked about the shell, well, I put up the armor, like, that was how I got
mhm.
through it, and I can remember a boss telling me, "You're unreadable," and I thought that was, like, the best compliment anyone ever gave me. And they were like, "No, no, that is not a compliment." And so it's so fascinating to hear your story, gosh, like, so terrifying to hear that story, and it's so interesting that sometimes it's not even what happened to us, the trauma. Like, the trauma was big, but it's
Mhm,
not even the trauma, it's the story we then tell ourselves year after year about that trauma and how that can have such a big impact on our life and how
right.
we show up or don't show up because we can equate it back to that moment in time.
It's the undercurrent of injury delivered to us upon a sinful world, and that we learn that not only can it happen to us, but that it's everywhere.
Yeah.
That's the sad and hard part, and there's a lot of ways we try to walk on the earth through that, but God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, the Creator offers us a completely new way.
Mhm.
And the thing is, so I'm gonna get into the gears of now. Let's talk about what happens here, what God does, because God knows us from the moment before we were even conceived. As we're growing in our mother and we are entering the world, God knows us, and God has seen us already live our whole life. God is not time, God is life. And so we're pursued, right? And everything's to be used. So I will say what everybody should be ready for.
Mhm.
And I know many, if you talk to other people who've already felt the embrace of Jesus, they'll tell you these moments of their Jesus encounters. They can happen like very slowly and gently and sometimes suddenly. And then if someone hasn't had this yet, it will happen. I'm telling you, it's gonna happen. So the Jesus encounter, and I think that I say this a lot, God wastes nothing.
Yeah.
God wastes nothing. And so fast forward in life, I will say I had my Jesus encounter. And again, it was a really another difficult time in a sinful world. I mean, my husband and I was, in my corporate career, again, in my performance self, trying to knock things out of the park that more things kept coming in front of me, right? It was always that. And then we had 9/11 happen, which really fatally wounded a company my husband had, which was really terrifying. So now we're on the financial cliff.
Yeah.
And then I had, the story of my stepson, who I want to just say this on this podcast and just say that I love him and I pray for him every day and God be with him. He had a pretty catastrophic situation unfold where he overdosed. He survived it, obviously, and we were in a trauma center. And at this point, I've been running with the chaos of my life. The chaos of my life was the king of my life. I mean, I was, what does this evil king need today of me? What chaotic situations are upon my horizon this day that I'm going to have to battle through, be it my own will. And,
Yeah.
you know, in me being someone who was generally sensitive, it was so hard for me. There was days I thought, I'm not going to make it through this day.
Mm.
But we were coming out of a trauma center, and this is crazy, Natalie, but this is God can work in a million ways. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. We had stabilized. We were bringing my stepson home, and the doors of the trauma center open. It was dark. It was downtown Atlanta, and it was just like this wash of wind,
Mm.
cold wind. It was a cold night. It was a winter night, and I just remember this exactly. The 2 doors opened up in the coming out of the trauma center, and I literally heard it in my heart as if anybody could speak to me as loud as they could. It's like, "You will hear me now."
Wow. Ooh,
Isn't that like, and I knew instantaneously. It's like I knew instantaneously that was God. Like, I didn't have any question in my mind, in my spirit, in my soul, and I was not going to church. I wasn't even, looking at anything. I wasn't thinking about God. I wasn't thinking about any of it. I just washed into me. I did think about God a lot as a child. I will say that. I did like going to church as a child. I did have prayers I wrote as a child, but in my adult life, I fell away from all that. And this is I'm out of there. I'm walking out of the trauma center, and there it is. And that's miracle number one. Miracle number two, the second thing I did without anybody telling me I should do this is I opened up a Bible. I found one of the Bibles in our house and I opened it up to the Gospel of John. That's the second miracle. I mean, think about it. What would you do, right? Could you ignore the voice? No, I went deeper, and where did I go? To the Gospel of John.
wow.
And I remember my husband coming into our bedroom one day and seeing me with like, and he also had the same experience where he used to be all in his faith and kind of walked away from it. And he's like, "Hey, I'm glad you're doing this now." And so that started me back into my Christian walk. That's how
Mhm,
it started. That was my Jesus encounter, and which we'll talk about now is, how Jesus comes and can grab you.
mhm.
So I'm gonna stop there for a second. But
Mm,
yeah.
gosh. Ooh, it's beautiful. I mean, I was just in your story with you there, but I love this because so often it's in the crisis. It's in the
Yeah.
crisis that we hear the voice of God. It's in the crisis that we dig deep and hear his voice. And so I just love where your story's going. And yeah, just go ahead and continue. But
So
it's in
yeah,
that deep crisis. I just feel that.
it's suffering is where Christ suffering is sometimes is the richest land. Suffering is the richest ground where because I think when you don't wish suffering on anybody, but without suffering, we can live in an illusion. But with suffering, it's almost like spiritual soil has been tilled. You know what I'm saying? It's like things are all churned up and the performance self is not got its footing and
Yeah.
we know it.
Yeah.
You know, we know it. It's not doing it for us. It's not finishing the job. It's not getting us through the day. It's not calming the fears or it's not resolving the anxiety. And,
Mhm.
so we have to have something and we got to hold on to something. And God knows He's got to give us that handhold. He's got to come.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so I'm going to talk about peace self a little bit. And I'm going to talk about it from a standpoint of this, encountering with Jesus. And I think the thing that is so powerful, and this was a big epiphany, and it took me a lot of years to get words on this. It actually took me moving hundreds of miles away from Atlanta to get words on this. But what it is so you think about sin as a cancer and Christ is the cure. So when Jesus encounters us and he says, "I'm going to hand you your peace self," he's going to work first on the always worthy, always loved part, right? And how is he doing it? Well, I had a pastor say this to me once. I thought it was one of the most brilliant statements I've heard. The entire Bible, finish, start to finish, is all about forgiveness. It's forgiveness. If there was a theme, right? It's forgiveness. And what Jesus does is he brings, if you look at the scriptures and you just focus on Jesus' words and his words alone, he is the embodiment of full redemptive forgiveness,
Mm.
right? First, and so you notice when you go to any of the stories that you read in the gospels about Jesus and everybody and what he's doing, the guy dropped down from the ceiling, they wanted to get to heal, and the woman that was almost stoned, the beautiful things Jesus says a lot, he says it a lot, is your sins are forgiven.
Yeah.
You know, it's that soul cancer, that cancer that destroys us in these not even countable unworthiness encounters that we have in our life that pile up. That's all about sin and
Yeah.
sin. And when we begin to accept that, that is when, so we're like, okay, so sin doesn't carry the weight that it has carried. It's almost like you can imagine in your mind's eye the performance self trying to run a few steps ahead of the sin going on, right? And it's an unending race. Now it's like, I don't even need to carry this anymore.
Yeah.
And this is why it really goes when people say, "Oh, well, what's the relationship with Jesus?" I think of Jesus as a friend, a buddy, a brother, not everything more than even just all the great things of a savior. I mean, it's like I told somebody once, when you love somebody so much, you really want to introduce them to all your friends.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
Jesus, like, it's so magnificent, and so this is also why, through my experience, that I have found God's word to be such a living, breathing thing because literally it's brought all this to life for me, right?
Yeah.
So, and what happens is you get embraced by Jesus, and then he invites you into his story, which is so powerful. And there's, of course, many things to read on the whole topic of why the Bible shouldn't even be here today, right? The Bible is a miracle. I mean, that the fact that it even can be in existing and the whole credibility of its
Yeah.
history. So here we are, and Jesus takes us on a new path. He takes us on a new path with him, teaching us through these stories and through relationship with him about forgiveness. And so once we're in that path with him, is what I learned is the learning part, because the learning part is really what it is about building out our faith and learning how to use this powerful tool of forgiveness to forgive ourselves and to forgive others. And so it's receiving forgiveness from a God who will never abandon you and having that as a secure setting to a root system to unimaginable love and mercy, and knowing how to receive that activates our faith. And then the second thing is being able to use the forgiveness by forgiving yourself and others. And then what happens is we do not need the performance self the same way anymore.
Wow. I mean, I can't believe it, but we always say this, we're like out of
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
Where can people find out more about this? Because I know that you've been writing on this topic, you've been writing prayers on this topic. How can people connect into this content?
So I just started on Substack. So I hope so you can go out and look for me on the easiest thing is to go out on Instagram and look for Peace Over Performance. Okay. You'll find me there on Peace Over Performance. And there you will find writings that I've started on Substack. And Substack is also by the same name, Peace Over Performance. And that's where I'm going to begin sharing all of more of what we're talking about. And the prayers I write, all of it will be right there.
Well, I love this, Amy, because you really guided us through the fact that, hey, there's trauma that comes into our life sometimes, and that can create that performance self. I mean, it always is sparked from something. It's not just out
Right.
of nowhere. And oftentimes it is that trauma. And then you kind of guided us through this understanding that if we're always loved, always what was the other one?
Always loved, always worthy, always
Always
loved
learning.
and learning.
I love it. Like if we think about that, that puts our hearts in a different position. But don't just grab that up as a humanistic idea. Connect it
Mhm,
to your relationship with Christ. Connect it to the center of that. And then
mhm.
from there, you can start to live from a place of peace and not performance. Because and I love this, when we show up as our peace self, we're able to give to the room, not take from the room. When we show up as our
Right.
performance self, we need something from everybody in the room. And now we become a taker. We become
Mhm.
you hear that sucking sound sometimes when certain people walk into a room,
Yeah.
but when you live from your peace self, you're able to show up in the room and look around the room and say, "What does this room need that I have?" Not, "What am I here to take from everybody or extract from everybody?" And I love, love, love that, and I think there's so much more people should explore, in your writings on this topic. So, Amy, you're a pleasure, you're a joy. I always love spending time with you.
Oh, it's mutual, 100% mutual.
Well, thank you for your time today.
All right, it's good to see you, Natalie.
Good seeing you. Ladies, if you haven't had a chance to step into community, I want to ask you a question. What are you waiting for? Head over to thrivetoday.com to learn more. We'll have conversations just like these all the time on our platform. In addition to that, you can get around like minded community and learn about all the different resources that are right there at your fingertips. Ladies, you've heard it here. As Amy says, we want you to live from a place of peace today and not performance. We'll see you next time.